You're listening to Stealing from Wizards, Volume 4, Arson, by R.A. Consul. Chapter 6. High School.
Dragons are wholly solitary creatures. The only time dragons can be found in each other's company is when competing for territory. These encounters are brief, violent, and not infrequently fatal to at least one party.
For all the pomp and circumstance, for all the warnings and promises of how different it would be, high school was much the same as junior high. Over their entire career at the junior high, they had been told that such and such behavior would not be tolerated at high school. They'd be held to higher standards. More would be demanded of them. Teachers there would not be so kind and forgiving as they were for the younger kids. The specter of their future torment was deployed often to terrify them into being better students. Within hours of starting classes, all that was exposed as a ruse. The students were just as unruly, and the teachers equally floundering to keep control. The haunting threat of high school was replaced with the even more nebulous wraith of real life, which would presumably start sometime after graduation. For someone who had already experienced enough of real life to be suspicious of claims that he'd need to derive Sir Merlin IV's proof of inverse kinemagic motion from scratch, Kuro was unmoved by their threats. The novel effort to encourage students into responsible behavior by appealing to their pride as role models to their juniors also fell flat, as most of his juniors mistook him as one of their own. What kept him in line, got him to show up on time and stay quiet and diligent in class, was an effort to preserve his new teacher's limited patience for his incompetence. It would take longer for him to be ejected from the classroom if they didn't already hate him before he started blowing things up by mistake. The high school teachers were, each in their own unique way, weird people. It seemed that life trapped on an island trying to make teenagers learn magic drew a strange sort. No stranger, perhaps, than the junior high teachers, but less concealed as they did not have to play the part of babysitter. Kuro's very first class was taught by a man who appeared barely alive. He was gaunt, expressionless, and pale. He stood utterly still, slouched, hands in the pockets of his brown slacks, eyes fixed on the floor. His speech was distant and emotionless, as though his thoughts were barely in the same room as his body. "Good morning and welcome to Advanced Spellcraft. I am Dr. Bernoulli, and it is my overwhelming pleasure and honor to present your first high school lecture." It was said with all the enthusiasm of a damp rag. His words appeared on the blackboard behind him as he spoke. Simply appeared. No floating stick of chalk or projector. He was skilled enough at magic to have his chalkboard transcribe him live. "We're a small class, as always. Few share a passion for the theoretical nuances of arcane arts. If tradition holds, there will be fewer still by the end of the school year." It wasn't clear whether that was a joke or a threat. Whichever, it was plainly true. The class was only a dozen, populated mostly by the academically outstanding like Evelyn Lemieux and Freya Myrmidaughter. The only other lodger in the group was Jennifer Tanaka, who had become somewhat obsessed with spellcraft, as fireflies sometimes did. Not being raised with magic, she had no instinct for what its limits were and was driven by curiosity. Kuro was driven by a calculated effort to pass. The great thing about advanced magical theory was that they wouldn't be expected to apply any of it. He copied every word that appeared on the board and found he was unusually well suited to the course. Years of friendship with Arthur had made him comfortable listening to the drone of the teacher. His next class was as opposite as could be. Minutes into his first lecture, Mr. Sigurd was arguing with Charlie about the merits of using high dragons as a model species to begin their study of fairy realm beasts.
"They're the quintessential fairy realm species which inspire awe and curiosity,"
claimed the chipper old man, dressed in all green to match his dragon skin boots and hat. He gestured to the dragon skull displayed proudly in his classroom.
They're nearly extinct, can't be domesticated, and have a bad habit of eating people. Why don't we study something we could actually meet? Charlie argued, an unusual diversion into practicality for her.
They're the foundation of our entire field of study, retorted the teacher.
That sounds like a bad foundation, said Charlie. High dragons are like the exception to every rule. If you have to talk about dragons, why not start with a rock drake or wyvern?
It went back and forth like that until Evelyn could tolerate the insolence of the lower classes no longer and interrupted with a scathing, I'm certain our teacher is a better judge of appropriate subject matter than a student. There was a brief silence before she chose the word student, which spoke volumes as to what she thought of the country girl. Charlie grumbled but yielded the fight. Even she wouldn't say to the teacher's face that she disagreed. In music theory, Kuro had the complicated pleasure of meeting Mr. Lovelace, husband to the Mrs. of the same name and numerology teacher at the junior high. He appeared to be in competition with his wife for who could be the most eccentric. He spoke in major chords, not musically shifting between notes, but all of them at once, as though he'd installed a pipe organ in his voice box. Insisting that learning had an optimal tempo, he worked to a metronome, rhythmically clacking out letters on the chalkboard. History was the class Kuro was most looking forward to, as it was the only one he shared with all his friends. They'd agreed over the summer to take it together, though they hadn't quite anticipated the complications. Arriving after lunch, hauling Charlie along to keep her from being late for the first class, he was surprised to find a line outside the door. Bella and Craig were doing security checks on each student before entering. Not that checking wizards for weapons was a very meaningful act, given that they could burn down a building by thinking too hard. But it was a reminder that the knights were there and paying attention. Knights were inside the room as well. Azalea and Moira attended as students, though they wore the Tirnanog Knight uniforms rather than Avalon School blazers. High-collared, royal blue, and emblazoned with their heraldic devices, an oak tree and silver mantis respectively, they stood out among the sea of dull uniform gray. Also notable were the cuffs around their wrists containing their armor and the swords dangling at their hips, creating a tripping hazard. It seemed some weapons were allowed in the classroom. They flanked Marie, who wore a tiara, her blocky Blandlands glasses, and a look of absolute exhaustion. The appearance of Charlie and Kuro was like rain in the desert. I was worried you weren't going to come, she said. People are dropping classes I'm in because of all of this. She gestured at the knights, crown, and gaggle of people paying far too close attention to their conversation. I think the only ones staying are trying to win my favor or something, and keep picking desks close to mine. Yes, Sebastian, I'm talking about you. She didn't even turn to face him. She knew the excessively coiffed Acadian was listening in. The only reason the two of you have seats near me is that Azalea threatened anyone who tried to sit down. Azalea gave a lazy salute to her liege, a gesture she seemed to have picked up from Sir McCool. She then looked Kuro in the eye and shriveled. He felt bad sitting next to her. Before he had sat down, the young woman was confident, relaxed, one might even say happy. Were Arthur not sitting beside his sister a few chairs down, wearing his habitual face, he might think it was the changeling doing a bad impersonation of Azalea. Once he'd invaded the chair beside her, the gloomy bookworm he knew and feared reappeared. Her scowl returned. She let her black hair fall in front of her face to hide her dark eyes, and she wrung her hands as if she needed to wrestle them into submission to keep from drawing her sword. The brief joy at being reunited in class was stymied by the arrival of the teacher, who started already angry at having been searched upon entry to her own classroom. She walked in, stuffing her arms back into her black blazer that had been thoroughly investigated by the knights. Before even introducing herself, she turned on Marie. Don't think you'll be getting any special treatment, Ms. Akinwande. She said the name with force, making it clear that she had intentionally failed to refer to Marie as Your Majesty, technically a crime in Tirnanog. I'll not be changing a damned thing about this course, and certainly won't be tidying up the behavior of your ancestors for your comfort. She seemed startled by the reaction of utter relief from the young queen. Thank you, Marie said quite honestly. I should probably know the bad stuff from my history. I'll try not to cause any more trouble for you than I have to." The teacher was allowed the briefest of moments to reevaluate the assumed hubris of the queen before her delusion that the class might be respectful and productive was shattered. "We'll make up for it," shouted Charlie, throwing an arm over Kuro, an involuntary conspirator to her shenanigans. "I'm Charlie Cook. What's your name?" "Titania," the teacher said with a grim recognition of a kind of student she'd wrangled with before. "But you will call me Ms. Jones." Ms. Titania Jones was not just angry at Marie and her knights. She was angry about everything. Students, fellow teachers, assignments, textbooks, and most confusingly, history. It appeared that Ms. Jones' goal as a teacher was to make others as angry as her, presumably so she'd have company. Mr. Erlenmeyer, on the other hand, seemed to be angry in the hopes of making people go away. He introduced alchemy class already in a filthy lab coat and protective eyewear. "Anyone here because they enjoyed de rigueur's coddling can drop the course now. I've 3 years devoid of rigor to correct. Any of you who have heard that we spend the first month just relearning how to stir properly have been misinformed. A strong class spends the first month on that. Weak ones will be working on it until solstice." Based on the reactions of other students, Kuro was the only one looking forward to that. Practicing a reverse undulating fold was calming and satisfying when it went perfectly. He found himself smiling in anticipation of the soothing month of repetition ahead, a reaction that drew at least 2 sets of eyes. The first belonged to the teacher, who peered at him through the narrowed field of view granted by his goggles. It was a look of layered confusion, a paired question as to what Kuro was doing there, and why he looked happy about it. A very similar look fell on him from the opposite direction. The same questions, but from Evelyn Lemieux. Precisely the same gaze followed him to his final class. Evelyn glared at him throughout the introductions to household management in a state of confounded fury. Miss Gyoza had the manner and appearance of a wizard who had been enjoying her students' cooking for decades and was happier for it. Squat, round, white-haired, and full of joyful enthusiasm, she trundled around the room with an energy unmatched by teachers half her age and bore a smile that swelled her already plump cheeks and pushed her eyes into crescent moons. After working her way through the syllabus and safety rules for the kitchen, she said with no hint of sarcasm, "I also want to recognize the 2 freshmen joining us this term. Kuro and Evelyn are brave enough to try out a second-year course, so do offer your support to them. Now we only have so many ovens, so I'll be pairing you up for our cooking days. It's always nicer to cook with a friend anyway. The very best food comes from collaboration." She squeezed her eyes shut and wiggled slightly as she recalled some favorite culinary experiences. "Could I get our freshmen to pair up at this workstation at the front? That way I'll be right close by if you need help, and I'm sure it will be nice to work with a familiar face." It was indeed a familiar face. One full of superiority, arrogance, and seething rage. Thank you for listening to Stealing from Wizards. If you liked our show, please consider rating or reviewing on iTunes. If you want to support this podcast or just can't wait for the next chapter, the full book is available on Amazon, Kobo, and Indigo. Our theme music was written by Camille Saint-Saëns, transcribed by Franz Liszt, performed by Rebecca Verdun, and used with permission. This episode was produced by Jim Tigwell.